welcome to Life in the Leadership Lane. I'm your host, Bruce Waller, where I get to talk to leaders that are making a difference in the workplace and in our community. What did they do to get started? And what are they doing to stay there, stay in that leadership lane? And today, I'm getting to talk to Jimmy Taylor. Jimmy is a business executive for Insperity. He is also the 2021 and 22 Texas SHRM State Director. And he's also a keynote speaker. And I am excited to have you on the show today, Jimmy.
Bruce, glad to be with you. We've been friends for a long time. I'm just delighted to be able to take part in your show today. Thank you.
Oh man, I'm excited you're on. You know, in full transparency, we've known each other for a long time. I was trying to think the first time I met you was actually when you were part of the Dallas-Fort Worth SMA Staffing and Management Association. And then of course, we later served together with Dallas HR, and today we get to serve together for Texas SHRM. So glad to have you on the show. We're going to talk a lot about leadership today. We're going to talk a little bit about Texas SHRM. One of the things I also am going to touch on a little bit later is also some of the things you like to speak about. And I was actually thinking back, as I was thinking about the show, I was thinking back 2020, you were one of the keynotes for the West Texas HR Symposium. And I remember watching you speak and just admired, I've always admired your leadership, but I admired your presentation because you had no notes, you had no slides, and you delivered a powerful presentation really around people matters and talent. And so I was so impressed with that. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about that. But before we get started, I would love for you to talk just real briefly a little bit about your organization, Insperity, and just give us a brief highlight of how you serve your customers.
Sure, love to. So Insperity is a professional employer organization, a PEO. So companies come to us to outsource HR, payroll, compliance, HR technology, and I have the best job in the world. I get to work with a group of clients, making sure that service offerings are going well, but more importantly, making sure that what we're delivering strategically helps drive the right business outcomes for the clients. So personally, we'll talk about this probably a bit. I believe there are huge cash registers in HR, and I didn't used to believe that. I used to believe HR was really only an expense center, but we really can see that HR really pays off. So that's a little bit about what I get to do with Insperity on a daily basis. Absolutely.
Love that. And definitely want to get into that conversation. To get started, I love to just kind of go back to the beginning. And I love to ask my guests just to share us your story. And I would love to hear the Jimmy Taylor story. Where did you grow up, and how in the world did you get into leadership, in particular in HR?
So I'm a local guy. I grew up in Fort Worth, never strayed very far from home. Attended college at the University of Texas at Arlington. I was a journalism communications major, and out of school, I was with a small oil and gas company, and it was kind of a downturn in that business, and suddenly I needed a job, and I had a friend who was in recruiting, and he said, "You'd be a great recruiter." I didn't know what recruiters did. Nobody grows up wanting to be a recruiter, right? We don't even know that career exists. And he worked primarily in the insurance and medical space, and I certainly didn't know much about either of those worlds. But I did agree to give it a try, and I really quickly fell in love with recruiting. I love, Bruce, I love that match when you put somebody who's really talented in a role that's a good fit for their skills and their personality, and you just watch them bloom as an individual. So I really loved the recruiting aspect. So I did that for a long time, a lot more years than I want to admit to at this point in my career. But the way I got really interested in the leadership component of that is really two things. First of all, with HR professionals, we don't often have an opportunity to really develop our leadership skills. So many of us serve in HR departments of one or maybe pretty small HR teams, and so that leadership is tough to come by. And that's one of the reasons I love SHRM as an organization, the local chapters, and Texas SHRM, because I think it's a great opportunity to develop that. But the other thing too is I spent years as a recruiter and watched what made people want to leave their current job. You know, there's things that pull us into our jobs that really make us attached to our employer and things that drive us out. And I realized that a lot of it was around engagement and the leadership that they were serving under within their organizations. So it really made me start to get really interested in how leadership really impacted recruiting and talent retention. So it was just kind of a natural evolution over lots and lots of years.
Wow. And then of course, at one time you led your own company as well, right? And so let me ask you this. Do you think recruiting is more challenging today? Have you seen, let me put it a different way. How have you seen recruiting change over the last, let's say 10, 15 years?
Well, if you go back all the way back into the early 90s when the internet was kind of the new thing, there were several industries that they said the internet would just do away with that industry. And recruiting is one of those. They said you just don't need recruiters, right? Because there's no intermediary needed. Anybody can contact anybody. And that certainly is true. If you look at social media, LinkedIn and other platforms, we do have the ability to reach out and connect. But the need for recruiters, the importance of recruiters, I don't care if they're corporate in-house recruiters, agency recruiters, executive search firms, I would argue the need has never been more pronounced because recruiting has gotten infinitely more complex because of social media and the ability for people to have access to so much information. Candidates are much wiser. They know a lot more. Companies know a lot more about people's background. But that human touch, that person who really looks at not just the job description, but the task and the outcomes of this role within the organization and is able to translate that back to an individual's strengths and drives and motivators to see that they're going to do well in that environment is more important than ever. And so I think that's how recruiting's changed, because if you look at the outcome that we're looking for when we bring great talent in our organizations, it is almost never a failure because someone couldn't do the job at hand. We almost always get it right in terms of hiring the skills we need to do the job. Where we miss is, can they and will they do the job in this environment with this set of challenges based on the position of the company, with this leadership team that they're reporting to, all those intangibles that we know make someone either really sticky and never want to leave an organization or want to flee at the first opportunity. All those things have gotten so much more complex. So I think that's the most important way. Lots of small ways recruiting's changed in terms of technology and all the steps we take. But in the big picture, I think that's what's really changed.
Man, you're right on. The human touch. I love that. Obviously you're very passionate and very experienced in the talent acquisition space as well. From your background, I was just curious. I always like to know, was there a moment when you found like your purpose in your career, or I like to call it find your lane? When you found your lane, was there a moment, or have there been moments? Talk a little bit about that.
Boy, it's an interesting question. I don't know that there was one magic moment, but I do think it's an evolution of the influences and the people that have really impacted me in my career. That I just really, I got this passion about figuring out what makes employees really engaged, and how do I individually, in my role day to day with people I'm interacting with, how do I make a positive impact on everyone I come in contact with? So, that's really my two passions, and those are just kind of outgrowths of a couple of decades of working in recruiting and kind of the people business.
I find that a common theme about people that I've talked to on life in the leadership lane is the importance of impacting people. And when people find that moment when they're able to really impact people, they just have this sense of fulfillment in what they do. And so that's fantastic. I want to talk leadership, and I want to talk about you've been a leader in the business setting. You've been a volunteer leader. You're currently the Texas SHRM State Director. Tell me, how would you define leadership?
Wow. Bruce, if we ask 20 leadership development experts, we probably get 20 different variations of that. I'm gonna take a pretty simple path, and you've probably heard this before from other people too. But there's really only one test of leadership. Regardless of what our perspective is on leadership and how we develop it, the only test of whether I'm a leader or not is, do I have followers? If someone doesn't have followers, they're not a leader, regardless of their title or their role or their desires or anything else, which is really interesting, because if you think about that, if we're in an organization where there's some folks who love it, stay forever, and some folks who are maybe not doing as well and not very happy with their environment, within both of those camps, there are leaders. And there are leaders that are driving that organization forward and helping them reach their potential. And there are leaders that are actively taking that company the other way. We all know how many, if you look at the Gallup numbers, how many disengaged and actively disengaged employees there are on the average work site. Within each of those two camps, disengaged and actively disengaged, there are powerful leaders that are having an impact, just not the impact we probably need them to have. And so what's one of the things I think we overlook within organizations are, if we're trying to turn that engagement more positive and trying to really retain our folks and empower them, one of the keys is identifying those leaders that maybe we wouldn't normally look at in the actively disengaged category and say, is it possible to turn this person around? Because if this person's a leader, and I know they are because they've got followers, and I can turn them around, I likely turn around a department, a division, a segment of my company that's not performing as well. So leadership to me, is just about people who have followers, and then leadership development becomes the task of helping people really grow their skills so they can use that leadership talent they have to develop followers and use it to help their careers individually and help our organizations.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm curious though, your thoughts around, so leading in a corporate organization, whether profit or nonprofit, and leading in a volunteer organization. Do you see a difference there, or do you see those as being the same?
Well, I think there's a lot of similarities. I do, and I think that's one of the powerful incentives for folks involved in SHRM chapters. The big difference is that the volunteers that we're trying to lead, they all have day jobs. They're all busy, and so oftentimes it takes a little bit different analytical skills on the front end to say, does this person really have the ability to really deliver in this role over a long period of time? And then it takes probably a little bit different motivation as a leader to make sure that we're keeping those folks engaged and empowered to do the work of that local chapter. But I do think that, I think in broad strokes, the skills needed are very, very similar. And again, I'll default back to this because I do think that this is the single most important thing that a SHRM local chapter does. And I think there's a lot of important things that local chapters do. But I think the single most important thing, and one of the reasons I love some of the work you're doing with Texas SHRM, is I think that the importance is we help HR professionals learn, practice, develop, and sharpen their leadership skills. And if I'm in an HR department of one, and I was an HR department of one within my organization for a few years, it is so difficult to get those opportunities. So I really love the fact that we do help, I think, shepherd HR leaders, because there's never been a more important time through the pandemic, through some of the changing environments all of our companies see themselves in, for HR to really emerge as strong leaders, able to impact the bottom line of the organization and the deliverables.
Yeah, I've always talked about the appreciation I've had for being in a volunteer leadership role, because it gives you a chance to lead outside the organization. It gives you a chance to develop incredible relationships outside the organization. And what you're talking about, it gives you a chance to really be involved in your own personal development to lead, so you can bring back to the workplace. Talk a little bit about, so Texas SHRM, I mean, you are the state director for this year. A lot, I mean, we've seen a lot of change. I mean, since this the pandemic started in 2020, now here we are in 2021 navigating through this. Talk a little bit about some of the exciting things that you're thinking about as the leader of the organization, as far as some of the initiatives we have.
Well, I think the biggest one really is, again, the one that you're heavily involved with. We are trying to develop a leadership development program so that local chapters could use that to develop their own leaders, potentially chapter members in organizations, be they profit or nonprofit around the state, might take that thing back to their own companies and use it as a tool to develop leadership. Because we all know in small business, and I say small business from, less than 1,000 employees, which most of us work for, it's a real struggle to develop talent management, succession planning, leadership development. And you oftentimes that HR professional feels like they're starting from scratch. So if we can build out a program that they might be able to use within their organizations, it'll have a tremendous impact. So that's the single most exciting initiative that we're involved with. And it's a big project, and it's going to take a lot of time. And as you know, lots of folks who are helping to shepherd that. But I think it's really important work. And I think we'll look back a few years from now and say that was a pivotal decision by Texas SHRM to do that. And then beyond that, just doing everything we can to provide resources to those individual chapters. We've got 32 chapters around the state of Texas, and Texas is a big state, and lots of HR professionals, and certainly the ones in some of the major cities will have oftentimes a lot of resources available. But if you're in maybe a smaller community, you may not have access to those same things. So supporting those chapters is really critical. So those are the two things that really get me jazzed on a day-to-day basis.
I love that. Talking about leadership development, that's one of the things I'm really excited about this year, being leading up the leadership development with Roseanne Garza and a team that's going to put together this leadership development program. And it's interesting. I talked to a lot of different HR professionals and business leaders. And when I start talking about leadership development, there are some that are in some large organizations that have programs in place, which I think is absolutely fantastic. But you're right. There's a lot of organizations that don't have that in place, and they are trying to figure out, how can I go out and develop as a leader? Number one. Number two, how can I find time? And, Texas SHRM has been an organization that has been here to support all of those chapters. Now, how can we add more value in being able to help them with leadership development? I agree with you. I think that's going to be an absolute game changer. I'm curious, does Insperity have a leadership development program?
Yeah, we have a lot of components of that. It's interesting. Insperity got about 9,000 clients across the country. So some of them very small, 5, 10, 15 people organizations. Some of them several thousand. And so that looks a lot different in terms of support that we give, depending on what the client's individual needs are. And so many times, and I think this is going to be true for the leadership development program for Texas SHRM that you're spearheading the efforts on, but so many times, even if there's something in place, there's a lot of evidence that it's not working, either because of company performance or other factors. And so I think that's one of the things that we're looking for here with Texas SHRM, is to make sure that we bring in not just a leadership development program, but what really works. I'll tell you a quick story, and you know this individual well too. I'm a big fan of Bob Chapman's. I read everything he writes and listen to every podcast he puts out. But it's really interesting. They went through with his company, and they're $4 billion organization at this point. They went through a pretty strong change in the way they developed leaders. It was a monumental shift in their thinking and their culture within the organization. And this goes back, 15, maybe 20 years ago now, and their company took off as a result. And so when they changed the way they started developing leaders, they changed everything about their business, the financial return, the employee retention, you name it. But they've had a really interesting exercise. Some of my clients are private equity firms. And if you look at private equity firms, when they buy a struggling company, one of the things typically they do is they wipe out the senior leadership team, because that senior leadership team in some fashion failed. And the private equity firm, if you were to boil it down to its simplest, was basically saying, hey, you guys drove this thing into a ditch. We're not going to invest a lot of money so you can drive it back into the same ditch. But Bob Chapman thought maybe that wasn't right. So they have acquired in their organization a number of struggling manufacturing companies. I think it's 14 or 15 now. And certainly they've had some executives of those organizations voluntarily choose to leave. That happens in any acquisition. But they've not voluntarily replaced any of those executives. They've not shown any of them the door. What they have done is they've given those individuals a new leadership framework to work off of. They taught them a new way to lead and develop people. And they've turned every one of those struggling organizations around. And so as we look at leadership development, I think that's incumbent upon us and our organizations to say, whatever we're doing from a leadership development perspective, is it working? And if it's not working, maybe we need to change it. So within Texas SHRM, what we're really hoping for is, for some organizations, we'll show them a better way to do leadership development and maybe help them solve some of the people problems that are incumbent in the way they're doing it currently.
Oh, I think that's fantastic. I'm a big fan of Everybody Matters, the book by Bob Chapman. I remember reading that book, and this is kind of a side note. The thing that stood out in that note was there was a statistic in the book of 88%. And so basically it said 88% of the people that they surveyed didn't feel like they were valued or their voice was heard in the organization. And when I read it, honestly, I thought that's a big number. That's got to be way too high. So I went and tested it, and I went and talked to a couple of different, I would say one's director level and one's a little bit higher level. And I said, hey, I just read this. 88% of people don't feel like they're valued or heard in the organization. And this was during the pandemic, probably 3 months in. And I said, what do you think? You think the number's too high? And both of them pretty much said the same thing. They said, no, I think that's right on. I said, really? Are you kidding me? Why would you say that? And they both said because they hadn't heard from their leaders. They hadn't heard from them from a call like, hey, how are you doing? How are things going? Is there anything I can help you with? And it just really, honestly, it shocked me. And the more I've looked at this, the more I see it. And I think Bob Chapman and that organization has really just done a great job of just having those conversations, right? And held in their hand. What do you think about that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Bruce. I think that so many times employees don't feel listened to. And so I like solutions. I like really simple solutions. Richard Branson said, any idiot can make it complex. You got to be brilliant to make it really simple, right? But so when I find people who've made things simple, I share them. But if you look at just the way that leaders check in with their people, if in the absence in what you just described, where a leader's really not checking in to see how an employee's doing, if a leader would just learn to ask 4 things every single week of every one of their direct reports. What went on last week? What went well? Because I need that employee to have those positive things rolling in their brain. The neuroscience tells us that that's really critical for an individual, both for their stimulation and enjoyment of their work environment, but more importantly for their creativity, so they can problem solve within the work site. So what went well last week? What went poorly? What'd you struggle with? I need to know that as a leader, Certainly there may be actions that I need to take based on what didn't go well. What are you working on this week? So many times we get 6 months down the road with our employees and they've been working on the wrong priorities. They were working hard. They were working on what they believed was important to the organization, but the priorities had shifted and it never got communicated. And then what do you need from me? Just so they have a way to check in. If you check in on those 4 things with your people every week, we know that those people will feel much more heard. The alignment between what's being done and what needs to be done will be better. And overall, people will enjoy their work site and their relationship with their direct manager better. So yes, I think we're so busy with the pandemic and everything we're dealing with. It's really hard to stop, check in, and listen to our people. But we don't need to overcomplicate it. We just need to do it in an easy way. But I think you're right on with your comment.
Oh my goodness, folks! If you if you don't have a pen and a journal right now, hit pause and get a pen and a journal, because there's so much gold here. Just 4 things we can do, and that is ask these questions: what went well? What are you struggling with, or maybe what went poorly? What are you working on, and what do you need? That right there is absolutely fantastic. I appreciate you sharing that.
Happy to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man. Oh my God. Hey, let me ask you, what drives you? I mean, you're pretty driven leader. What drives you?
Really just the ability and the desire to make an impact on people's lives. I mean, I think we're all at the core, no matter of all the things that divide us. I think at the core, we all want to see people do well, people prosper, organizations and ideas fostered and move forward. So I'm just driven by really helping people, number one, identify what their passions and their strengths are, because we know they're not going to do well on the work site if they don't really know their strengths and if they're not able to use those every day. So helping people understand what their strengths are, how to apply those to the job at hand, and then kind of getting out of people's way. Those are the things that really motivate me and inspire me, because we all want to get to the end of our life and say, yeah, we supported ourselves, we supported our families, but more importantly, we made an impact. That dash between the year of birth and the year of death really meant something to that group of people. And certainly that's within the work site, but it's also, of course, within our families and the people that are closest to us and we love most. So that's what motivates me.
Yeah, listen, that's fantastic. I love that. That's good. Hey, I know that you do a lot of speaking. As I mentioned to start the show, I got to see you. I've seen you many times, but last year, of course, was most recent. Share a little bit about what are a couple different things you like speaking about and why?
I'm going to sound like a broken record. I love talking about the employee engagement experience and how to transform it, how to make it better, because I do think that I think there continue to be huge opportunities for most of our organizations in that area. And when we can really pull people in and get them engaged and empower them to go do their jobs well, not only have we helped transform our organization, which is what we're called to do and paid to do as leaders, right? But just as importantly, we're helping them transform their lives. And if you look at, I don't care if you're talking to Simon Sinek or Bob Chapman, or if you look at any of the organizations, Whole Foods, all the conscious capitalism companies, if you talk to the leaders about what they've done to really engage, empower their employees, there's this unwavering truth that the narrative always includes personal stories of how we impacted people's lives outside of the workplace. And so we know that work-life balance is pretty much a myth. We know that there's just life, and some of it's work life and some of it's personal life. But when we can provide a work site that has a spillover impact into how we relate to our significant others and communicate with them, and maybe how we raise our kids or how we serve in the community, when we have that spillover effect, that we're having an impact beyond just the workplace. And isn't that what really motivates so many company leaders. I met with, for 4 years, I met with entrepreneurs, around the country, and one of the key components of entrepreneurs is that they care deeply about their communities and they care deeply about their employees. And it was almost 100% true with those business owners that I got to meet with. But so often the struggle, the divide, the breakdown was they didn't really know how to translate that into the employee experience. So that employee engagement thing is not just about motivating somebody so we get a better bottom line, although that definitely happens, but it's really about understanding, humans and how we engage them and again, empower them to go on. So I love that. I love talking about recruiting because I think that engagement and retention and all those things that sometimes we struggle with, they start with the launch of that requisition and the questions we ask that hiring manager about this person that they're going to be hiring. So I love to talk about those two subjects.
Yeah, man, you're very good at that. I will say that, over the last, I don't know, few years, other than 2020, when COVID came into play, everybody's talking about, workplace, hiring talent, right? And,
Right.
and the shortage of workers and talking about engagement, talking about remote work and leadership. Well, we figured out a way to do remote work. And we've talked a lot about leadership development on our show. I want to ask you though, I want to stay on engagement for a second. I think this is just such a hot topic, an important topic. What are a couple of, share just maybe a 1 or 2 tips for some of the listeners out there right now that are thinking, you know what, we need to do a better job with engagement. We have been through this, last, 14, 15 months with COVID, and now we're trying to, get back, navigate through this thing. Is there something that companies could do to just get started to have a better engaged workplace?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bruce. Certainly it varies from company to company with size and kind of maybe the struggles, but let's talk about some things that generally tend to work pretty well. The first is creating some kind of feedback loop. A lot of times we know, we have a gut feel that we're really struggling with engagement, but we may not have a good way to quantify it. And, go all the way back to Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, he said, the foundation was confront the brutal facts. So we do have to have some kind of starting point. And I like things that are measurable so we can actually see progress. So, the first thing I would say that a company really needs to think about is what kind of feedback loop do they have to really figure out where employee engagement is within their organization. There's all kinds of employee engagement surveys you can use. I mean, you can build your own and do it, through SurveyMonkey or whatever. But something that allows us to figure out what employees are thinking. And that exercise alone is pretty powerful in terms of engagement, because listening is one of the key drivers for employee engagement, leaders who listen. Mm-hmm. So when we do a survey, when we ask our employees, some pointed questions about their experience in the workplace, we're starting to really listen to them and give them a feedback loop to let us know how it's going. Another great feedback loop, you've probably heard people talk about the stay interview process. The stay interview process is a terrific way to figure out how people are doing. And a stay interview, you basically start from the CEO down, and everybody interviews their first level direct reports. But instead of doing an exit interview where we ask people who are frustrated and maybe angry why they're leaving, and we get, maybe not too actionable information, a stay interview, you're taking people who have been with the company who are, as far as we know, aren't going anywhere. And we're saying, Bruce, you've been here 5 years. You're a great performer. First of all, we only want to say that if it's true, but we've just reinforced to Bruce something he may not have heard very often. That is, he's a great performer. Why do you stay here, Bruce? What do you like about the organization? What do you think about when you're coming to work every day? What frustrates you here? If you were ever to leave here and go somewhere else, what would you go do? Where would you want to go to? That's risky ground for a leader, right? Because we're inviting a conversation. We don't know where it's going to go, but it's got a powerful impact on that employee, or at least on most employees. And then what else would you like to do around here? Where do you see yourself in a few years? Are there skills that you have that you don't think we're taking advantage of? What would that look like? And we have those kind of interactive conversations, very much like the conversation that two friends might have about their own career development, right? But we're transforming it from an employer to an employee. First of all, it's a terrific trust builder. And trust is the currency of any human relationship, certainly employer and employee relationship. So that's a powerful driver if you don't have another feedback mechanism in place. And then one other thing that I think is so easy, and you're actually great at this, Bruce, and I will confess that I struggle with this. There are times I do it okay and times I'm terrible at it, but just taking time to say thank you. A simple act of sending an email, or even more powerful, sending a handwritten thank you note. The CEO of Campbell Soups, and suddenly I'm blank on his name, but he was CEO during a time where Campbell had lost 50% of their market share in the previous 2 years, and CEOs tend to get fired when they've lost 50% of market share. So he was the new CEO coming in, and he said, I taught my leadership team to write hundreds and hundreds of thank you notes. And we would mail those out. We'd hand deliver them to the corporate office. And he said 5, 6, 7 years later, I'd walk in somebody's cubicle in some field office and there'd be that handwritten thank you note. You know, we just are so busy. It's hard to stop and say thank you. But who doesn't love it? You know, Bruce, I got your handwritten note back in January. You know, it was a great encouragement, uplifting moment. And I thought, why don't I do this every single day of my life? But if you can teach leaders to ask some simple questions, get some feedback through a survey or a stay interview, and if you can teach leaders to start to say thank you for real, they need to be real things. We don't just say, hey, nice job, way to go. But it's, hey, you caught that shipment error that was going to go out to the client. Had that gone, that would have been really detrimental to this customer. You stopped that. They never knew they almost got the wrong product. Thank you for doing that double check. I've now reinforced an important behavior. That employee knows not only do I care, but I'm watching what they do. I know what's going on within this organization. I've just done a number of simple things just by taking the time to say thank you. And we know statistically, if there's not 7 positive, encouraging statements for every corrective action, and as a leader, I'm going to have corrective action with my employees. I'm going to have the tough conversations. Accountability is not about watering it down. I've got to have those conversations. But if I don't have 7 positive ones to every one negative corrective one, the workplace that I'm in is going to be seen as negative and oppressive, and people are going to tend to not perform up to their potential. So those are just a few simple keys that we all know, and most of us, including myself, are not taking the time to practice them regularly.
Oh, that's fantastic. Engagement, the feedback loop. I like that. And I hear a lot about the importance of listening. As a matter of fact, I think it was Mitch Beckham talked about listen, relate, understand, and then listen and keep listening. And then, of course, the stay interviews. I love, write this down. Trust is the currency to a relationship. That's fantastic. And of course, the thank you. I read a very inspirational story about the CEO at Home Depot, Frank Blake. Kind of did the same thing. And some of the great inspirational leaders, you read about that. I mean, the president, you know, George H.W. Bush, and then George W. Bush. And then some of the, you know, it's just so inspiring. I actually have a personal note from the chief customer officer at Armstrong Relocation early in my career, when he wrote me a note to let me know how much he appreciated me. And it was just very encouraging and inspiring. I put it up on my bulletin board, and it reminded me of the value I had. And so that is a great point. I'm glad you shared that.
Thanks.
Oh man,
it is easy, but not simple, or maybe simple, but not easy.
I heard a guy say one time, easy to do, easy not to do.
Yeah.
And you are so right. You have to really be intentional. I find myself, you know, I find myself once every quarter or a couple times a year challenging myself to write notes and do different things. And I'm thinking, why don't I do this like every single day? But you're right, it takes time, but I think that this is a great reminder. So if you're out there and you're listening, write down somebody's name that comes to mind right now and send them a note. And it will absolutely impact them, but it will impact you as well. And so appreciate you sharing that. And
Yeah,
let me,
Bruce, I'm sorry, can I just add one more story?
Please do.
Stories change us, right? That's why we all love them so much. But one of the things I've done in manager training, and I've done this probably, I don't know, 12 or 14 times over the past few years, and I've never gotten through a single session where at least one person didn't have tears as a result. And typically that was, an older guy. It was the guys who they break down. But in a manager training, we'd have their leader, their direct supervisor, write them a thank you note. And as part of the training, we would, when we talked about engagement and developing their team and how to be an encouragement to their team, say thank you and all that, we would pass out those thank you notes and have them stop and just read those to themselves, right? And share them if they wanted to. But it's such a powerful reminder when you see how much that impacts people emotionally, just how important that thank you really is. So you might want to try that with leadership teams.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So you're going to listen to this and then you're going to re-listen, write that down and try that out. There was actually a football team. I think it was LaSalle. They called it accountability cards. And I don't know, they won like 150 games in a row. I mean, they set some high school football record. But one of the traditions they had was they wrote notes and they would pass it along. And basically they would say, you can count on me for this. And they just kept passing them around, and it just really brought everybody together. And when you're talking about development, when you're talking about engagement, I mean, just the simple fact of writing something down and sharing it with someone will just link you just that much more. And so that's fantastic. Indeed. Oh man. Oh, I'm inspired right now. This is so good. Let me ask you this: for someone that's listening and says, you know what, I'm not involved in Texas SHRM. How would I get involved in Texas SHRM? What would you say to that person?
Well, I'd say start at your local chapter. Get involved in your local chapter, whatever. I mean, again, 32 chapters around the state. You're probably close to enough to one that you can join and attend the regular meetings. And a lot of them are still meeting remotely based on COVID. So certainly there's opportunities for a lot of them to connect, remotely to their monthly meetings. So I would certainly attend a meeting and participate, maybe find a way to volunteer just to give back. Maybe you've been a few years in your career and you really do want to give back and you've got some flexibility and some wisdom to share, or maybe you're very young in your career and you still have plenty of opportunities to give back and to continue to develop your network. So I would start there in that local chapter because that's where the magic happens, right? It's not only just that monthly meeting, but it's those relationships. Bruce, you and I are the same. We can face almost any business or HR problem and really in a matter of minutes, think about the experts that we've met that might be able to help us with that particular issue. And so I think that's such a powerful return on investment of the time that you spend with the local chapter and the dues that you may pay or the lunches that you may attend, because you're developing that network for your own career, both for the information you need to thrive in your career and just as importantly, maybe for that next rung up the ladder as opportunities develop. So that's if you're not involved in a local chapter, I would certainly start there.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic. And if you want to find a local chapter, you can do that at texasshrm.org, and that's TEXASSHRM.org. Go there. You can find your local chapter. Listen, I'm so excited about your leadership for Texas SHRM, and this is why I think that you are an inspiring leader, and I've always admired you. I want to ask you, to get to this point in your career, it seems like we have people that help us along the way. I was just curious if you could share, were there some mentors in your life?
Oh yeah, I've had so many. It'd be hard to list. Some of them were informal. They probably never even knew they were a mentor. Maybe through a book they wrote, or an opportunity to hear them speak, and then directly. Bill Fuller trained me in recruiting and was one of the best recruiters I've ever known. And Bill was a terrific mentor in terms of helping me grow and develop as a young recruiter. Roger Jenkins runs a healthcare organization today, but he was one of the early clients, and in so many ways he was a mentor as we looked for people for his organizations. And there's just been a score of them. I think that again, it's the value of the network that we build, that there's just so many people who are like-minded who say, hey, how can we develop people? How can we lend our talent and expertise to helping this person grow? That's really what happens. And I guess any association, but certainly within SHRM, that's really is what happens. It becomes a camaraderie to help people, solve problems and grow and develop. So, a ton of them. A couple of them that I would highly recommend. Certainly one of them we talked about already, but if you haven't read Bob Chapman's book, I think Bob mentors everybody through his book, because he delivers the playbook. And Bob's not a consultant; he's a CEO, owns the company. He's not looking to build a consulting practice, so he just puts his playbook out. Here is how we do this. Here's how we turn organizations around, and it is a step-by-step process. And you talk about something that mentors somebody, that's a terrific mentorship piece. So that's a key one.
Now, is that book, I'm going to put that in the show notes. Are you talking about the book, Everybody Matters?
That is Everybody Matters by Bob Chapman.
Okay,
Yes.
Very good. Very good. We actually read that in our climb group and discussed that, and we all loved it. And so having this conversation makes me want to pick it back up and reread it now, because I remember how good that book was. We talked a lot about leading teams, leading Texas SHRM. But I want to just shift just a little bit. I want to talk about leading yourself. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's one of the hardest things, is to lead myself. But I would love for you, if you don't mind, if you could share, what does a typical day in the life of you look like? Like when do you get up? Are you an early riser, or do you stay up late? And do you have a daily practice that you do every day that helps you keep on track? Would you mind sharing that?
No, happy to. My daily practices have evolved over the years based on my roles, and I think somewhat because of my age. But I am an early riser. I haven't always been, but certainly these days, I'm usually up, anywhere from it just varies, but pretty early. And I like to, when it's still quiet, I like to read for a while, just to get some kind of focus. That's really helpful, just to prepare for the challenges and the stress ahead. Kind of regrounds me, recenters me. So I try to do that, daily. The weekends sometimes take a life of their own, so it sometimes varies a bit. But certainly Monday through Friday, I really try to do that. And then I try to make sure that my day is mapped out pretty effectively. All of us, if you're in HR today by nature, there's an element of your job that is highly or almost exclusively reactive. So I think setting time aside for the reactive nature of our jobs, especially during the COVID pandemic, has been increasingly important. But I do like to come into the day with a pretty structured regimen. And really, of late, really the last year or so, I've really tried to come into each week with two strategic outcomes. We all have the tactical things. We've got to get whatever the tactics of our role is, we have to get those executed on. But the things that really drive all of our jobs forward, drives our organizations forward, is the strategic elements. So what are the two strategic things this week that I maybe not get resolved or complete, but I want to make progress on? Because it's just a tool that I've found helps me kind of get out of the fray somewhat and think about the bigger picture. We tend to do that, annually or quarterly or in some kind of planning session. but we get caught into the muck and mire of the daily activities. So keeping those couple of strategic activities focused on, I'm trying to make some progress on it, is kind of a discipline that just of late I've learned to build into my routine as well. And in terms of reading, one of the things I really like to do, you mentioned this with Everybody Matters, there's a few books, there's not many, but there's a few books that I like to reread. And Everybody Matters, I read at least once a year, because you know, you just forget some of the details that you really need to be able to access, because learning, you know, learning's a lifelong endeavor, right? So it takes time. So I like to reread things, but then I'll vary in terms of blogs, in terms of who I like or who I listen to or whatever, just really depending on schedule and maybe some of the things I'm facing. So that's a little bit about my daily routine.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think the thing about it is that to me, it seems like the common thread for leaders that are really making impact is they have a system. And so they typically will get up about the same time. They typically will do the same types of things. And that's a key. I talk about the importance of automating and how that's, you know, how we stay on track. And I love how you also talked about the, you know, how it's evolved, because just because you're doing something today doesn't mean you have to do that every day for the rest of your life. Right. You can continue to learn. And that's one of the things I'm hoping to pull out of the show is that, hey, let's pull out some different practices, because everyone seems to have something a little bit different, and then find what works for you and maybe to help you, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Oh man, this has been so good. The time flies so fast. I've got one more question I want to ask before we get into it. Time to accelerate to finish the show. And this question is around advice. And I always like to ask, was there any advice that you have been given in your career that you continue to share with others because it was just so good?
That's a great question. I think, you know, it's an overused trite phrase, but just to enjoy the journey. I think that we get so bogged down in the stress of life that we forget to enjoy the journey. And for me, the advice I got around that was to keep a gratitude journal. Just to write down every day 3 things that you're really thankful for. And the guy who told me that, you know, I think his illustration was sometimes that may be, hey, I'm thankful this day was over because it was so terrible. I'm ready to start again, right? But in the midst of any trying circumstance, and you know, if I look around, you know, you're the same. We so many folks who've gone through, you know, job losses or job changes or, you know, lost loved ones or whatever through this last, you know, 12 months that we've been through. Keeping that gratitude top of mind is really, really important. It's important for our career, but it's certainly important for our emotional health, our mental health. So, you know, stay positive, enjoy the journey, and have a heart of gratitude. I think it was the best advice I've ever gotten, because that transcends anything going on in the workplace, right? That again speaks to our human nature.
And I love that. You know, one thing I've noticed about you over my career is you're a very grateful leader, and and I can just tell that in your approach. I've never seen you rattled ever. You just seem to be like relaxed, like joyful, like in the moment. And you may have had a tough day, but you don't show that. And I think that's because you're such a grateful leader. I do a presentation called Great Leaders Are Grateful Leaders. And I talk about the importance of looking for the good. And when we look for the good, we'll see the good, and it makes us feel differently. I remember one day I was having a tough day back in June, July of 2020. And I mean, it was one of those days. And I just pulled out a piece of paper and I just said, I'm going to start writing down everything I'm grateful for. And 30 minutes later, I just felt picked up. I just felt so better. And it's amazing what happens when we lean into the gratitude. So great advice. I love that. Hey, let's go to, it's time to accelerate. I'm going to ask you a few fun questions as we kind of wind down the show. And the first question I'd like to ask is, would you rather read a book or listen to a podcast?
I'd rather read a book. I'm old school. Like to turn the pages, and so I'd rather read a book.
Love it. And I'm going to put the book by Bob Chapman in the show notes so people can click on that. What are you most grateful for? We just talked about being grateful. What are you most grateful for?
Oh, I'm just grateful for my family, the opportunities I've been given, good health. I mean, those are the things that you just, we all know that the storms are going to come at some point in life, and so those are the things I'm really grateful for. And I'm really grateful that I get the opportunity to do things every day that are pretty fulfilling based on my temperament and my personality. I guess that's the other good advice that I would give people is if you haven't gotten that position yet where you're using your strengths and your temperament and your natural wirings, don't quit, don't give up. Keep looking for that either within your role or within potentially another role. So go ahead with your question. Sorry.
No, that's fantastic, because there's somebody out there right now listening that needed to hear that. And I appreciate you sharing that. That means a lot. I know a few people that are right now, they're grinding, trying to find that. And so that's what great advice. Keep going. Hey, 2020, I mean, so glad we're out of that. This is season 2. So 2021, what are you most excited about coming up?
Returning back to some kind of normalcy, being able to be face-to-face with people more than what we have in the past. I mean, that's true for those of us in SHRM chapters, right? We're looking forward to the face-to-face meetings and enjoying those. And the work side, it's the same, right? So I think and the great thing is, and I'm kind of an internal guy, right? I mean, I've worked remotely at least part of my work week for, I don't know, almost 20 years. So I never really thought that 100% remote would be very challenging. But I think we all found out that whether we're an extrovert or more internal, we need that face-to-face connection. Just yesterday at church, our pastor was talking about the things that happen when you're not face-to-face, and the differences in Zoom. And there's some profound impacts, and it's why we're so fatigued at the end of a long day with Zoom meetings. It's just a different interaction for our brain. So that's what I'm most excited about.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh man, me too. I'm excited about that too. Okay, last question is a final question, and a question I really enjoy asking my guests. And here's the question. Jimmy Taylor, 10 years older. He's knocking at your door right now, and you get up to answer that door. What's he going to tell you?
Oh, that's a good one. I think he's going to say, enjoy the journey. Have more faith. Don't stress the little things, and just keep giving it your best.
That's so good, man. Have faith. I love that. Oh man, you're definitely driving in the leadership, my friend. Hey, let me ask you this. If someone wanted to connect with you or follow you, how would be the best way that they could connect with you, Jimmy?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn is by far the best. I'm not a heavy Facebook user, so don't go there. I only open it a couple times a year, but I try to keep current with my LinkedIn contacts and try to put up things from time to time that are of interest. So that's certainly the best way.
Perfect. I'll put your LinkedIn link in the profile. So if you want to connect with Jimmy, talk to him about Texas SHRM. Maybe you want to talk about leadership development, engagement. He would be glad to connect with you. And if you want more information on Texas SHRM, I'll put that in the show notes as well at texasshRM.org. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to get to just have this conversation. I am confident there were some things that you shared today that are going to help a lot of people. And I just cannot wait to share this. So thanks again for coming on the show, my friend.
Thanks for your show, Bruce. Thanks for all you do.
Awesome. Can't wait to share it. I'll see you, Jimmy.
Thanks. Take care, Bruce.